Adolin fought the other three, having cast himself among them again. He fought marvelously, but could not fend off all of them. The three surrounded him and struck. The pauldron on Adolin's left shoulder exploded into a burst of molten metal. Bits trailing smoke through the air, the main chunk of it skidding to the sands a short distance away. That left.
Please, Almighty.
Dalinar turned upon the stands full of spectating light eyes.
You can watch this. My sons fight alone. There are shard bearers among you. Is there not one of you who will fight with them?
He scanned the crowd. The king was looking at his feet.
Amaram. What of Amaram?
Dalinar found him seated near the king. Dalinar met the man's eyes. Amaram looked away.
No. What has happened to us? Where is our honor?
Honor is dead.
Dalinar turned and looked at Captain Kaladin. He hadn't noticed the bridgeman walking down the steps behind him.
But I'll see what I can do. If this goes poorly, take care of my men.
Spear in hand, Kaladin grabbed the edge of the wall and flung himself over, dropping to the sands of the arena floor below. Kaladin dashed across the arena floor.
Again. Just like coming to Amaram's rescue so long ago. This had better end differently than it did that time.
It will.
Syl zipped along beside his head, a line of light.
Trust me.
One of the shard bearers, Relis, the one in black armor, trailed Stormlight from a crack in the vambrance on his left forearm. He glanced at Kaladin as he approached, then turned back away, indifferent. Relis obviously didn't think a simple spearman was a threat. Kaladin smiled, then sucked in some Stormlight. On this bright day, with the sun blazing white overhead, he could risk more than he normally would. Nobody would see it.
Hopefully.
He sped up, then lunged between two of the shard bearers, ramming his spear into Relis's cracked vambrance. Kaladin pulled his spear back, twisting between the attackers and getting close to Adolin. The young man in blue armor glanced at him, then quickly turned to put his back toward Kaladin. Kaladin put his own back toward Adolin, preventing either of them from being attacked from behind.
What are you doing here, bridge boy?
Playing one of the 10 fools.
Welcome to the party!
I won't be able to get through their armor. You'll need to crack it for me.
Nearby, Relis shook his arm.
Storming, dark-eyed fool.
The tip of Kaladin's spear had blood on it.
Not much, unfortunately.
Just keep one of them distracted from me. I can handle two.
All right.
Keep an eye on my brother if you can. Things go sour for these three. They might decide to use him as leverage against us.
Done.
Kaladin pulled away and jumped to the side as the one with the hammer, Dalinar had named him Elit, tried to attack Adolin. Relis came in from the other side, swinging as if to cut right through Kaladin and hit Adolin. Kaladin's heart thumped, but training with Zal had done its job. He could stare down that shard blade and feel only a mild panic. He twisted around Relis, dodging the blade. The black-plated man glanced at Adolin and took a step in that direction, but Kaladin lunged as if to strike him in the arm again. Relis turned back, then reluctantly let Kaladin draw him away from the fight with Adolin. The man attacked quickly, using what Kaladin could now identify as line stance, a style of fighting that focused on defensive footing and flexibility. He went more offensive against Kaladin, but Kaladin twisted and spun, always getting just out of the way of the attacks. Relis got frustrated and turned back to the fight with Adolin. Kaladin slapped him on the side of the head with the butt of his spear. It was a terrible weapon for fighting a shard-bearer, but the blow got the man's attention again. Relis turned and swept out with his blade. Kaladin pulled back a hair too slowly, and the blade sheared the pointed end off his spear. Careful, he tried to lead Relis farther away from the fight. However, when he pulled back too far, the man just turned and moved toward Adolin. The prince fought desperately against his two opponents, swinging his blade back and forth between the men on either side of him.
Storms, he's good.
Kaladin had never seen this level of skill from Adolin on the practice grounds. Nothing there had ever challenged him this much. Adolin moved between sweeps of his blade, deflecting the shard blade of the one in green, then warding away the one with the hammer. He frequently came within inches of striking his opponents. 2-on-1 against Adolin actually seemed an even match.
But 3 is obviously too much for him. I need to keep Relis distracted.
The man was striding back toward Adolin, weapon raised, gritting his teeth. Kaladin charged. He crossed the sands in a quick dash, and then, right before Relis, Kaladin jumped to put his feet toward the shard-bearer and lashed himself that direction many times in quick succession, as many as he dared, so many that he burned through all of his stormlight. Though Kaladin fell only a short distance, enough that it wouldn't look too unusual to those watching, he hit with the force of having fallen much farther. Pain shot up his legs like lightning striking, and he heard his bones crack. The kick flung the black-armored shard-bearer forward as if he'd been struck by a boulder. Relis went sprawling on his face, blade flung from his hands. It vanished to mist. Kaladin crashed to the sand, his stormlight exhausted, and the lashings ended. By reflex, he sucked in more light from the spheres in his pocket, letting it heal his legs. He'd broken them both and his feet. The healing process seemed to take forever, and he forced himself to roll over and look at Relis. Incredibly, Kaladin's attack had cracked the shard plate. Not the center of the back plate where he'd hit, but at the shoulders and sides. Relis climbed to his knees, shaking his head. He looked back at Kaladin with what seemed like an attitude of awe. Beyond the fallen man, Adolin spun and came in at one of his opponents, Elit, the one with the hammer, and slammed his shard blade two-handed into the man's chest. The breastplate there exploded into molten light. Adolin took a hit on the side of the helm from the man in green to do it. Adolin was in bad shape. Practically every piece of plate the young man wore was leaking stormlight. At this rate, he'd soon have none left, and the plate would grow too heavy to move in. For now, fortunately, he'd basically incapacitated one of his adversaries. A shard-bearer could fight with his breastplate broken, but it was supposed to be storming difficult. Indeed, as Elit backed away, his steps were awkward, as if his plate suddenly weighed a lot more. Adolin had to turn to fight the other shard-bearer near him. On the other side of the arena, the fourth man, the one who had been fighting Renarin, was waving his sword at the ground for some reason. He looked up and saw how poorly things were going for his allies, then left Renarin and dashed across the arena floor.
Wait, what is that?
Syl zipped away toward Renarin, but Kaladin couldn't spare much thought for her behavior. When the man in orange reached Adolin, he'd again be surrounded. Kaladin scrambled to his feet. Blessedly, they worked. The bones had reknit enough for him to walk. He charged Elit, kicking up sand as he ran, spear clutched in one hand. Elit wobbled toward Adolin, intending to continue the fight despite his disabled plate. Kaladin reached him first, however, ducking under the man's hasty hammer strike. Kaladin came in swinging from the shoulder, holding his broken spear in two hands, giving the attack all he had. It smashed into Elit's exposed chest. The man doubled over. Kaladin raised his spear to swing again, but the man lifted a wobbling hand.
Louder!
The hand he raised, however, was enough. The watching judge spoke. Kaladin backed away from the cowering man, light on his feet, stormlight thundering inside of him. 3 shard-bearers remained. Relis had now returned to his companion in green, both carrying Adolin. They had the prince backed up against the wall. The final shard-bearer, wearing orange, arrived to join them, having left Renarin behind. Renarin sat on the sand, head bowed, shard blades stuck into the ground before him.
Is he defeated?
Kaladin had heard no announcement from the judge.
No time to worry.
Adolin once again had 3 people to fight. Relis scored a hit on his helm, and the thing exploded, exposing the prince's face. Kaladin charged up to Elit, who was trying to hobble off the field in defeat.
Remove your helm!
The man turned to him with a shocked posture.
Your helm!
Kaladin raised his weapon to strike again. He wasn't sure of the rules, but he had a suspicion that if he struck this man, he would forfeit the duel, maybe even face criminal charges. Fortunately, he wasn't forced to make good on the threat as Elit removed his helm. Kaladin snatched it from his hand, then left him and ran toward Adolin. As he ran, Kaladin dropped his broken spear and shoved his hand into the helm from the bottom. He'd learned something about shard plate. It attached itself automatically to its bearer. He'd hoped it might work for the helm now, and it did. The inside tightened around his wrist. Then he let go. The helm remained on his hand like a very strange glove. Kaladin yanked out his side knife. He'd started carrying one meant for throwing again, as he had as a spearman before his captivity, though he was out of practice with that. Throwing wouldn't work against that armor anyway. This was a pitiful weapon against shard bearers. Still, he could not use the spear one-handed. He charged Relis again. This time, Relis backed away immediately. He watched Kaladin's sword held out. At least Kaladin had managed to worry him. Kaladin advanced, backing him away. Relis went easily, keeping his distance. Kaladin made a show of it, darting in, backing the man away as if to give the two of them space to fight. The shard-bearer would be eager for this. With his blade, he would want a good open area around them. Tight quarters would favor Kaladin's knife. However, once a sufficient distance away, Kaladin turned and dashed back toward Adolin and the two men he was fighting. He left Relis standing there in an anxious pose, momentarily befuddled by Kaladin's retreat. Adolin glanced at Kaladin, then nodded. The man in green turned with surprise at Kaladin's advance. He swung and Kaladin caught the blow on the shard plate helm he carried, deflecting it. Adolin threw everything he had at the other shard-bearer, the one in orange, slamming his weapon down again and again. Green plate attacked Kaladin again, who deflected the blow off the helm, which cracked and began leaking stormlight. Relis came charging up on the other side, but didn't join the fight against Adolin. Instead, he thrust at Kaladin. Kaladin gritted his teeth, dodging to the side, feeling the blade pass in the air. He had to buy Adolin time.
Moments. I need moments.
The wind began to blow around him. Syl returned to him, zipping through the air as a ribbon of light. Kaladin ducked another blow, then slammed his improvised shield against the blade of the other, throwing it back. Sand flew as Kaladin leaped back, a shard blade biting the ground before him. Wind, motion. Kaladin fought two shard bearers at once, knocking their blades aside with the helms. He couldn't attack, didn't dare try to attack. He could only survive, and in this, the winds seemed to urge him. Instinct. Then, something deeper guided his steps. He danced between those blades, cool air wrapping around him, and for a moment, he felt, impossibly, that he could have dodged just as well if his eyes had been closed. The shard bearers tried again and again.
You cannot kill the wind. You cannot stop it. It's beyond the touch of men. It's infinite.
And then, his stormlight ran out. Kaladin's stormlight ran out, and he stumbled to a halt. He tried to suck in more, but all of his spheres were drained.
The helm.
He noticed that it was gushing stormlight from its numerous cracks, yet hadn't exploded. It had somehow fed upon his stormlight. Relis attacked, and Kaladin barely scrambled out of the way. His back hit the wall of the arena. Greenplate saw his opening and raised his blade. Someone hopped on him from behind, as Adolin grappled Greenplate, latching onto him. Adolin's armor hardly leaked at all anymore. His stormlight was exhausted. It seemed that he could barely move. The sand nearby displayed a set of lurching tracks that led away from Orangeplate, who lay in the sand, defeated. Adolin had beaten his foe and then walked slowly, one laborious step after another, over to where Kaladin fought. It looked like he'd used his final bit of energy to hop up on Greenplate's back and grab hold.
Storm it!
Greenplate swatted at Adolin. The prince held on, and his plate had locked, as they called it, becoming heavy and almost impossible to move. The two teetered, then toppled over. Kaladin looked at Relis, who glanced from the fallen green plate to the man in orange, then to Kaladin. Relis turned and dashed across the sands toward Renarin.
Storms!
Kaladin scrambled after him and tossed the helm aside. His body felt sluggish without the stormlight to help.
Renarin! Yield!
The boy looked up.
Storms, he's crying. Is he hurt? He doesn't look it. Surrender!
The lad focused on Relis, who was bearing down on him, but said nothing. Instead, Renarin dismissed his blade. Relis skidded to a stop, raising his blade high over his head toward the defenseless prince. Renarin closed his eyes, looking upward as if exposing his throat. Kaladin wasn't going to arrive in time. He was too slow compared to a man in plate. Relis hesitated, fortunately, as if unwilling to strike Renarin. Kaladin arrived. Relis spun around and swung at him instead. Kaladin skidded to his knees in the sand, momentum carrying him forward a short distance as the blade fell. He raised his hands and snapped them together, catching the blade.
Is that Syl's voice? Why is it inside my head?
It reverberated through Kaladin. That horrible, awful screech shook him, made his muscles tremble. He released the shard blade. Relis dropped the blade as if bitten. He backed away, raising his hands to his head. Relis ran across the sands and pulled open the door to the preparation room, fleeing inside.
High Lord Relis Ruthar forfeits by cause of leaving the dueling arena.
Kaladin climbed to his feet. He glanced at Renarin. The lad was fine, then slowly crossed the arena. Even the watching dark eyes had grown silent.
I don't think they heard the scream. It was only audible to me and Relis.
He stepped up to Adolin and Greenplate.
Stand up and fight me!
Greenplate lay face up on the ground. Adolin buried beneath him and holding on in a wrestling grip. Kaladin knelt down. Greenplate struggled more as Kaladin retrieved his side knife from the sand, then pressed the tip of it into the opening in Greenplate's armor. The man grew perfectly still.
You going to yield? Or do I get to kill my second shard bearer?
Storms curse you both! This wasn't a duel, this was a circus! Grappling is the way of the coward!
Kaladin pressed the knife in farther.
I yield! Storm you, I yield!
Great Lord Yakimov yields. The day goes to Great Lord Adolin.
The dark eyes were happy they got a show.